got a question for you. Are you a super saver? Are you a mega saver? I want to share with you a couple of key choices you can make in your life that will, in fact, empower you to have more control over your financial future. I have lived my life as a super saver and a mega saver. And if you know my backstory, I don't want to bore you with it, but for people who don't know, I'll be very brief. My father lost his job when I was a teenager, and I thought we were living a really, really fancy life, that my parents were loaded with money and all that. But when my dad lost his job, I had just gotten into college. I was in college, and I was home for Thanksgiving, and he told me that there was likely not any money for me to continue college. And I was like, what? And in that era, college was a lot cheaper, and I went to a school that mostly had night students. So I switched starting the next semester to be a night student, and then I got a full-time job. And in that era, I was able to pay my own costs, my own tuition, something that would be extremely difficult today. But it changed me. And fortunately, my parents got back on their feet after about 2 years. But what it did for me was it taught me that I was never going to be in a position where I didn't have a good cushion in my life. And I resolved that out of college, I would live on every other paycheck. And so right off the bat, I was living off of half of my net pay. And that was something I continued through my 20s, starting my own business with the money I'd saved, and then was able to amazingly retire at 31. And when I went back to work for fun later in my 30s, I started saving 70% of my pay because I had no meaningful expenses. And so I've been in a position where I originally was in talk radio, and it's a pretty risky profession. And I was saying things like I say now, knowing that any one day I could say something that would get me fired, and I didn't care because I knew I had financial independence before that term existed. Well, what I have done with my life is extreme, but there are lots of people who live on substantially less than what they make. And there's two things that are totally consistent in them that were written up in a story on CNBC based on research by a financial outfit, that there are two things far and above the others that are two characteristics of people who are able to live on less than what they make. And when I tell you these two, you say, well, gosh, that makes sense. You needed a survey to tell you that? But our mentality, our psychology, our behavior takes us so often in American culture down a different path. Number one thing that people do who save a lot of money is they drive old jalopies. And you'll hear people on this podcast, you'll hear where they say, well, my car is now 23 years old. And I was thinking maybe it's time for me to have a new one. Maybe? That's a different than normal American mentality, right? Number one trait of someone who lives on less than what they make is they don't give in to new car smell. Number two thing, and this dovetails exactly with a groundbreaking research project that became a best-selling book a generation ago, The Millionaire Next Door. Living in a modest home or modest housing. That is the second most common attribute. And so think about how much sense this makes. Housing, the number one expense most of us have in our lives. Vehicles, cars, automobiles, trucks, SUVs, whatever. Number two largest expense we have in our lives. And the latest data that your car is costing you over $1,000 a month now if you have a newer vehicle. So remember these two things. Because, yeah, we can talk about how much money you'd save if you drink tap water instead of bottled water. And we can talk about how much money you save if you break your Starbucks habit, and how much money you save doing these various things. And they do make a difference in your life, but they're not the big difference. The big difference is the big ongoing costs you have in your life. Yes, you can create more financial security where you don't have financial security right now by attacking your monthlies, and I talk about that. But the people who year in and year out, regardless of their income, regardless of what they do for a job, the people who end up the most financially secure are people who the way they handle money starts from a base of not throwing a lot of money at vehicles, and two, not throwing a lot of money at where they put a roof over their head.